morning. This is Today in Parliament. I'm Julian Reid. The House of Assembly will meet in about half an hour. It's not clear what's on the agenda for today's sitting, but in the meantime, let's take a look back at last week's proceedings. Last week, parliamentarians passed the Criminal Evidence Witness Anonymity Amendment Bill. Works Minister Desmond Bannister, who represents the Carmichael constituency, started off the debate.
Subject to certain protections, the law now permits a magistrate to grant an order which prohibits the disclosure of information that may lead to the identification of who may be willing to assist, of those who may be willing to assist the authorities in very serious cases, such as murder, manslaughter, rape, robbery while being armed with a firearm or offensive instrument, and certain dangerous drugs, anti-terrorism, and trafficking in persons offenses. So you can see, sir, that these are very serious offenses that this is permitted in relation to. The order is usually made if the person has a reasonable ground for fearing that they may be subject to intimidation or harm if they are identified as someone who is able or willing to assist in the investigation. The Act also permits the courts to protect witnesses by ensuring that their identity is not disclosed. In this respect, the court may order that the name of the witness and other identifying details are withheld, that the witness may use a pseudonym, that the witness is not asked any questions that may identify him, and that he may be screened, and finally, that his voice may be subject to modulation. Speaker, I am advised by the Honorable Attorney General that this Act has been a valuable tool in the war on crime, particularly in this day and age where gangs seek to intimidate and threaten witnesses. Our criminal justice system must be protected, sir, and we as lawmakers must seek to continuously improve the law so that we may live in a society where the rule of law is respected and where every person can feel safe. We are seeking this morning to amend the law because of a recent decision of the Court of Appeal, much as the English lawmakers responded to that decision in the Davis case. About 10:30 p.m. on the 3rd of October 2012, three friends were leaving Junkanoo practice at Christie Park, right on Nassau Street, when they noticed two men following them and another man standing on the road with a cell phone. Shots were fired, and one of the friends was killed. Could have been any of us, sir. The suspect was arrested. He was identified by two witnesses at an identification parade, charged with murder, was put on trial in the Supreme Court of the Bahamas before a judge who I know to be exceptional both in her work ethic and her understanding of the law. During the trial, Mr. Speaker, one witness was permitted to give evidence without the defendant, his attorney, the judge, or the jury being able to see him. Nobody except the person who made him swear the oath, see him. In his evidence, he told the court that he could not even disclose his position at the time of the shooting because he would be putting himself in the spotlight, giving up his identity, and be in fear of his safety. The accused man was convicted, but the Court of Appeal recently set the conviction aside in order to retrial. And in the process, they observed, as the previous Court of Appeal did, that Section 11.4 of the Act, by Section 11.4 of the Act, the court cannot require the witness to be screened to such an extent that the witness cannot be seen by the magistrate, the judge, or other members of the court, if any, or the jury if there is one. Today, sir, we are seeking to amend Section 11.4 of the Act so that the prosecutor or the defendant, it is important to say, prosecutor or the defendant, may apply to the judge to permit a witness to be seen and heard in his natural voice by a magistrate or by a magistrate's panel or by the judge, but not by the prosecutor, not by the other party, which may be the defendant, not by the other attorney, and not by the jury. Speaker, the Attorney General and the Director of Public Prosecutions are of the view that by passing this amendment, the passing of this amendment is critical to protecting witnesses who give evidence before our courts in these very serious matters. That is, murder cases, manslaughter cases, some of the Dangerous Drugs Act, trafficking in persons, those types of offenses. Today, sir, many ordinary Bahamians are shying away from even serving on juries, as those of us who have practiced law know, because of their fear that accused persons will see, threaten, and intimidate them. It is therefore not surprising that many witnesses will not give evidence unless they are permitted to do so anonymously. We have a relatively small, homogeneous country. Everyone knows everyone else. And we saw that in the debate here. We saw how passions can rise because we are against each other politically, but we still are friends in many cases. So everyone knows everyone else, and everyone knows everyone else's family in this country of ours. After the trial, witnesses have to go back to their communities after they have exposed themselves as witnesses. The police cannot be with them 24 hours a day. We can see why in this day and age, giving evidence in that type of case against a person that you alleged you saw committing murder can be frightening. So, Mr. Speaker, we have brought this amendment here for approval by this Parliament, and we trust that all members will support it. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, I want to enlighten colleagues to what I consider and others may consider to be a concern. We appreciate that this proposed amendment may have a weakness. We appreciate that. It will permit a judge in appropriate cases to screen the witness from the sight of a jury. I want to invite members, Mr. Speaker, to consider that as we debate the amendment. Because on the one hand, Article 20, Sub-Article 2G of the Constitution gives everyone who is charged before the Supreme Court the right to trial by jury. So a very legitimate question that we may ask is whether the making of such an order, as we are considering permitting today, would constitute a constitutional infringement with respect to the trial by jury. Some may argue that after we pass this, the courts may strike the amendment down as unconstitutional as it relates to Supreme Court trials, since the triers of fact are jurors are entitled to see the demeanor of witnesses and to judge their reactions as they answer questions. The government takes the position today, sir, that we have a duty to protect, to do our best, to protect witnesses who are brave enough to come forward to give evidence against murderers, drug dealers, human traffickers, and other despicable criminals who would otherwise get away and return to our communities to do more harm. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we take the position that we will do our duty in this place and then listen to the courts as they make their determination. However, Mr. Speaker, we must try. And in this respect, sir, I'm comforted by the fact that Section 13 of the Act outlines rigorous conditions and circumstances that must be complied with before a judge may make an order. So a judge can't just come out and decide to make an order like this. He has to comply with any number of conditions that have to be complied with. There has to be a question of the safety of the witness being raised by the prosecutor or by the defendant if the defendant feels that his witnesses are not going to be safe. There has to be a question of possible harm to property or person. These issues have to be raised before a judge. And even when an order is made, sir, Section 16 of the Act requires a judge to issue a warning to the jury. Speaker, I have looked at similar legislation, and I can't find any country that has taken the bold step that we take today. But as I mentioned earlier, we are a unique country. We're not England with millions of people. We have a small population, and we live in close-knit communities. Persons on the jury are bound to know who the witness is and also who the accused is. The question that had to be considered was whether the identity of an anonymous witness could be deliberately or inadvertently disclosed by a jury. And that's a very serious question because it has happened before in our country. Mr. Speaker, I ask members to look at the possible extreme outcomes. In this respect, there are two that are possible. First, the amendment could lead to the conviction of some violent, nasty criminals and also lead to the incarceration and the protection of our society. Or conversely, it could be struck down and we may have to spend another day in this place amending the law. Carmichael takes the first choice every time, sir. It is our sacred duty as loyal citizens of the Bahamas to support the amendment. Mr. Speaker, I invite every member of this place to unite in sending a strong message of our opposition to the murderers, drug dealers, and human traffickers. And that message should be that the Parliament of the Bahamas will leave no stone unturned in attempting to empower our courts to convict those who are truly guilty of these heinous crimes. Mr. Speaker, Carmichael supports our dedicated judiciary. Carmichael supports our brave prosecutors. Carmichael supports the rule of law. And Carmichael moves that the bill be read for a second time. Thank you.
National Security Minister Marvin Daines, who is the Mount Moriah MP, said the bill would ensure that criminals go where they should go, straight to jail.
So, Mr. Speaker, the bill before us seeks to amend the Substantive Criminal Evidence and Witness Anonymity Act of 2011 to provide that the identity of witnesses in criminal proceedings may only be revealed in screening by a magistrate panel, or a judge. Section 11, subsection 4 of the Act, as it exists, allows exposure of an anonymous witness, as any member of the court has the right to screen the anonymous witness. This loophole has already resulted in criminal appeal to the appellate court by convicted persons claiming that their rights to confront witnesses were violated, as the trial included anonymous witness testimony. Notwithstanding this loophole also created the issue of reprisals, which is a serious threat to upright citizens and, by extension, the pursuit of justice. Mr. Speaker, since 2015 to date, the anonymity order has been applied in approximately 80 criminal cases, according to police statistics. Out of this number, more than half of the cases showed evidence of witness tampering. In 2016, a senior justice ordered an extension of the anonymity order of protection for a witness for the start of a murder trial, here allowing for an extension of that order after the prosecutor argued that an eyewitness was hesitant about providing testimony if identity and location is not protected. One of the most effective ways to intimidate a witness is to indirectly employ pressure by threatening the well-being of a family member or a loved one. It is therefore incumbent upon us in this honorable place to strengthen this witness anonymity legislation to protect not only the brave witnesses in these criminal cases, but also family members and close friends. Police investigators will tell you that witnesses feel more comfortable and are more open to assisting them with relevant information in connection to crimes when their anonymity order is in place. And I have had the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to meet with investigators and to discuss this legislation and the amendments. And some of the more senior investigators echoed this fact. We are living in a time that is quite different from the decades of the past. Our communities are ravaged by violence. And there are some who reside in these communities who feel as if they are the outright authority because they possess a gun and because they can intimidate. We have an obligation, Mr. Speaker, to send a message to those persons who may feel that way, so that they will come to know that they are not the ones in authority, but we who represent the people are. And we must do all in our powers to ensure that those who stand up for justice are protected at all costs. It is therefore incumbent upon us in this honorable place to strengthen this legislation. Further, the anonymity order protects not only witnesses, but also, as I noted, family members from becoming targets prior to the start of a trial or during a trial or even after a trial. Mr. Speaker, the criminal justice system is one that operates under the tenets of fairness and balance. We are in no way attempting to infringe on the rights of the accused for a fair trial, but ensuring that the rights of witnesses are equally protected, which is considered to be the foundation of a successful criminal justice system. Passing the amendment to this bill will mark a significant stance for our government and send a strong message that we are the champions of all Bahamians who stand up for justice and are concerned about the state of violence in our beloved country and are prepared to risk everything for a return to the days when communities were free of incessant violence that threatened the safety and security and the development of our peace-loving nation. Mr. Speaker, I would be the first to admit that over the last decade, crime had spiraled out of control. However, in recent times, we are beginning to see some positive signs that the numbers are trending downward. Yet, we cannot fool ourselves into thinking that this is the same peaceful nation that many of us once knew as our children, but has over the last decade taken a turn in the wrong direction. Let us not fool ourselves. We now live in an era of intimidation where criminals constantly apply fair tactics to discourage potential witnesses from executing their constitutional right of free speech. As those who have been vested with the authority to govern by the people of this nation, we have an obligation to act to protect those brave persons who are prepared to stand up against ruthlessness and violence. to protect our children, our communities, and by extension, our nation from those with their agenda of violence. Mr. Speaker, we cannot and must not allow them to succeed. Gun violence and gang culture have contributed to the lion's share of all of the homicides committed for the years 2015 to 2017. In 2015, an estimated 79% of the murders were committed by firearms. In 2016, an estimated 84%. In 2017, an estimated 88%. And already for this year, an estimated 79%. Moreover, for the 3-year period between 2015 to 2017, there were 378 murders recorded, and the average range of 18 to 35 years of age were the victims and perpetrators. We cannot stand by and allow the youth of this nation to behave in such a way that are above the law and will do whatever it takes to allow justice to take its full course. When we say that we are serious about what it is that we're doing, we are. Mr. Speaker, we're not alone when in taking corrective measures to protect citizens of our country who freely want to see justice served and have enacted this witness anonymity legislation to do just that. The Commonwealth of Dominica passed the Protection of Witness Act in 2013, and the United Kingdom, as was noted previously, passed the Criminal Evidence and Anonymity Act in 2008. Mr. Speaker, our government understands the clear implications of not amending this bill. Criminals can grow in confidence while law-abiding citizens lose faith in the system.
Well, earlier you heard the Carmichael MP talk about the possibility of a constitutional challenge. Well, the opposition leader, Philip Davis, who represents Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, spoke to that at length.
Mr. Speaker, the witness anonymity bill has always troubled me in the context of our, what I call our constitutional democracy. And I say constitutional democracy because the Constitution is the supreme law. And we here who make laws for the good order, good governance of this country, have to do so in the context of what our Constitution permits. Unlike England, where there is a parliamentary democracy in a context where Parliament is deemed to be supreme, they could make laws with almost only limited by their own self-imposed conventions. And so when, for example, the witness anonymity bill in England, following the Davis case, was passed, it was passed by a parliament that had that power to do so, without regard to any what I call entrenched rights by a constitutional document. Of course, they would have taken into account what they call the Magna Carta, which is basically more followed by convention rather than by any stated obligation to it. And so, as I said, it's always troubled me because in the context of our criminal justice system, a person who is accused, first of all, is presumed innocent. I heard the policeman, sorry, the member from Mount Moriah. Yeah, the member, yeah, that's true. But the member from Mount Moriah, and I understand his views on these things, having regard to his background. All right, yeah. And that's why I had to commend the member from Carmichael and his balanced approach to this bill, recognizing some of the challenges. All right, so it presumes innocent under our Constitution. Secondly, we have to recognize that our Constitution ordains that a person accused has the right to examine in person or through his or her legal representative any witnesses that's going to be called to speak against them. And that examination of witness, if you go further in that provision of the Constitution that speaks to the rights of persons charged, also speaks to these proceedings being held in public. So those are some of the constitutional constraints we may have that may impact what we wish to do here. And so the which is exacerbated more so by the fact that the Court of Appeal in its own ruling recognizes the role of a jury being the trier of fact to which the member Carmichael spoke to, have being able to see those witnesses as well. And in this instance, the bill does not cover the jury being able to see witnesses. Now, to speak to it again further, when you speak about witness anonymity, that in itself, to me, might be a misnomer. Because when you speak about a witness, it means that I am present. You know, as a witness, I'm present. I'm observing, I'm seeing, or I'm experiencing what is going on. And so if I'm present, the person who's effecting what is going on, or causing what is going on, or committing what is going on, clearly that would be known to the persons doing those things. It may not be as, so in only in limited circumstances, I would think that a person who may be charged with an offense may not witness who's witnessing them commit the offense. And so anonymity is it name. They may not know the name of the person. They may not know where that person may live. But insofar as maybe being able to identify that witness, more likely than not, the person charged is able to do so. And so I have always thought that the better route to preserve what I call all the ancient rights that have been developed over years to ensure fairness. And that's why these rules were promulgated, is to ensure fairness in the system. And we are, in this essence, perhaps taking away an element of what might be fair to a person charged by not being able to confront witnesses. That's what we might be doing. I always thought that the better route might be, instead of witness anonymity in its, whatever that might mean, in regard to what I say a witness is, the better route might be to strengthen witness protection. So I was always more in favor of the strengthening of the witness protection program. Because at the end, that is a costly exercise. It is a costly exercise, but I think to ensure that we preserve all the ancient, um, all the ancient rights that have developed over years and time, that the response to what we say, the fear of witnesses, and to inspire bravery in witnesses, may very well be that we strengthen the witness protection program. And hence you would find, that's why Carmichael, you may not find in your scoring the jurisdiction to see whether there are any similar provisions, that you may find that that is because they understand the challenges and they appreciate that maybe we ought not to act in vain, and what we should be doing is strengthening the witness protection program. And that's what I invite the government to consider, how that could be strengthened. Because at the end of the day, the witness, the only thing that you may be very well removing from the knowledge of a person charged is maybe the address and the name of the witness. But if he were a witness and the person committing an offense was vigilant in the commission of the offense, he probably will know and be able to identify the witnesses who would have seen him do what he did. And so he's not anonymous anymore. And so, again, as I said, we need to, I think, move to strengthen the witness protection program rather than tinkering with the witness anonymity bill, which I think still will have its challenges in its present state. Because I don't think, I'm not aware that anyone has specifically raised an all-out constitutional challenge to the provisions. I'm not aware of it, save that it's been raised tangentially from what I call the other law provisions of the Constitution, but rather there's been a full frontal constitutional attack on the act itself. I'm not aware of it. And whether it will be able to survive such an attack is questionable, because I think there'll be much merit in such a challenge. We invite you, therefore, to, in considering this, what I call move from an accepted principle of fairness in respect to persons who may be charged. You know, demeanor of witnesses is very important, particularly when you're talking about witnesses in criminal matters, particularly now where the character of a defendant plays just as an important role today in whether the person has the propensity or the capacity to commit such an offense of which he is charged. That plays now a very significant role. To take away that person's right to be able to see and the person who is accusing him of having done something, it's really taking it very far. If the person, for example, when we talk about witness protection, is the accused person, we look at the circumstance of the accused person to determine whether the witness ought to take advantage of this anonymous provision. Because, for example, if this is someone who is not connected to any gang, he's not connected, this is a one-off, an offense that may have happened in the heat of the moment, would a witness be able to take advantage of being anonymous? any witness, all witnesses I've known in my career, all witnesses have some concern about giving evidence in criminal matters. I don't know of any witness who didn't go into a witness box concerned, right, about giving evidence. Yeah, I know, I'm concerned. Yeah, I know it goes a bit higher than I'm concerned, but one, we know how to tell a story to enhance that concern to meet the criteria. So the fact that they're just concerned, that's why I will continue to say, let us strengthen the witness protection program. But let the witness go in the witness box, and if there are circumstances after independent inquiries as well by agencies that we can set up for that purpose, and that person qualifies to be put in a witness protection, and let's put them in a witness protection program. But because I think we're going to have challenges in regard to our constitutional provisions to be able to sustain witnesses being anonymous. I think, yes, you might get away with not being able to provide the person's name, not get away with not giving them their address, but getting away with them being seen face to face will be a challenge. And that is our contribution to this. As always, Mr. Speaker, and to the government, we on this side recognize it's the responsibility of all government to ensure that our citizenry are safe in their persons, property, and free from any concerns of crime, and in particular fear of crime. We join you in your fight against crime, but we will, as we are in this case, pointing out, you have ably pointed out the challenges you have in the Act, but you have taken a policy decision, and where you take a policy decision and you see it and deem it to be a tool in the fight against crime, we join you in that, and we will support the bill.
And South Beach MP Jeffrey Lloyd, who is the Education Minister, supported the bill. He gave some examples why.
We know that witness protection is accorded to those feeling threatened involved in the justice system, including defendants and other witnesses during or after trials, and usually this is accorded by the state. This is a program, Mr. Speaker, across the globe. Now, not every country, but many, many countries have this. For instance, Canada enacted such a law in 1996. We've heard about the United Kingdom. All around the world, Israel, Ireland, Italy, Taiwan, Ukraine, the United States, and of course the United Kingdom have what is known as these programs to facilitate the protection, quote unquote. Even within the U.S., there are many states that, in addition to the federal program, have their own local program for crimes that are not covered by the federal program. Not as extensively are these witness protections, but programs nevertheless. Even in our region, Mr. Speaker, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana. And from my experience, this feature, this character of our justice system is vital. It's crucial. In fact, the circumstances of our socio-psycho-economic realities today, in which criminality seems to have a fertility in our Bahamian society, almost demands that some feature such as this is contemplated by any government, Mr. Speaker. In fact, in 2017, about a year and a half ago, during one of this country's most unfortunate rise in crime, prolific conversations, I could remember hosting many conversations on the radio station and the program that I conducted at the time, sought in the minds of people some more favorable enforcement of justice. Because again, as my learned colleague from Cat Island, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member, said, that there and I've done only 1 milliliter of the number of cases he's done in criminal law, but even in those circumstances, there was a palpable trepidation of the most menial matters, I mean, even traffic matters, if it came down to that, of witnesses entering into the witness box to give testimony, sir. But even back then, sir, 2017, there was this conversation that arose on the airwaves and in the community as to how this country can enhance the protection of witnesses, especially in high-profile murder cases. In fact, during that time, sir, many calculated that not enough was being done by the government to ensure further protection of witnesses. We know that there have been instances in our country where lives have been threatened, property have been destroyed. And we know of the noted circumstance case in 2012 where a mother and son were murdered who had only a few days to go before giving testimony in a trial, murder trial. In 2016, renowned psychiatrist in our country, Dr. David Allen, called for the appointment of a Citizen Security Council to bridge the gap between the government policy and community concerns. The use of foreign law enforcement, he even called for, and the defense force, legal reform on capital punishment, bail restrictions, and a witness protection program. Mr. Speaker, we know that in a small country such as this, protecting witnesses from murderous, venal ambitions of those whose lives and energies are contrary to the norms of a safe, orderly, and peaceful society is a prodigious task. It calls for, in some instances, 24-hour protection in what some may consider high-threat environment, where you might even have to provide financial assistance, maybe even for housing and other subsistences, medical care. If we are talking about relocation, Mr. Speaker, and that's also been the conversation, those expenses, job training, new identity. And the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, we're not just simply talking about that particular witness. Because if the identity becomes known, prolifically known, and that person, even if protection is provided that person. Let me give you another story, Mr. Speaker. I can remember one time a young man threatened me in Yeast, told me whatever, that if punishment was imposed upon him for some violation of our rules, that he was going to kill me and all of my family. So put me aside, Mr. Speaker. If you didn't have that much care for your own life, then it's your wife, your children, and so on. So it's not just simply a matter of the protection for this particular person. The concern now is the threats that may be even extended to their families. And the
well, if you take a look at your monitors now, you'll see that some of the House of Assembly members are in place. No sight yet of the leader of government business yet, Renwood Wells, but I'm sure that they will all be marching in fairly soon, and we will be bringing you these proceedings live as they occur. But if you're just joining us, last week they actually passed the Criminal Evidence Witness Anonymity Amendment Bill. And we'll let you hear from Desmond Bannister, the Carmichael MP, who actually tabled it.
Subject to certain protections, the law now permits a magistrate to grant an order which prohibits the disclosure of information that may lead to the identification of who may be willing to assist, of those who may be willing to assist the authorities in very serious cases, such as murder, manslaughter, rape, robbery while being armed with a firearm or offensive instrument, and dangerous drugs, anti-terrorism, and trafficking in persons offenses. So you can see, sir, that these are very serious offenses that this is permitted in relation to. The order is usually made if the person has a reasonable ground for fearing that they may be subject to intimidation or harm if they are identified as someone who is able or willing to assist in the investigation. The Act also permits the courts to protect witnesses by ensuring that their identity is not disclosed. In this respect, the court may order that the name of the witness and other identifying details are withheld, that the witness may use a pseudonym, that the witness is not asked any questions that may identify him, and that he may be screened, and finally, that his voice may be subject to modulation. Speaker, I am advised by the Honorable Attorney General that this act has been a valuable tool in the war on crime, particularly in this day and age where gangs seek to intimidate and threaten witnesses. Our criminal justice system must be protected, sir. And we as lawmakers must seek to continuously improve the law so that we may live in a society where the rule of law is respected and where every person can feel safe. We are seeking this morning to amend the law because of a recent decision of the Court of Appeal, much as the English lawmakers responded to that decision in the Davis case. About 10:30 p.m. on the 3rd of October 2012, three friends were leaving Junkanoo practice at Christie Park, right on Nassau Street, when they noticed two men following them and another man standing on the road with a cell phone. Shots were fired, and one of the friends was killed. Could have been any of us, sir. The suspect was arrested. He was identified by two witnesses at an identification parade, charged with murder, was put on trial in the Supreme Court of the Bahamas before a judge who I know to be exceptional, both in her work ethic and her understanding of the law. During the trial, Mr. Speaker, one witness was permitted to give evidence without the defendant, his attorney, the judge, or the jury being able to see him. Nobody except the person who made him swear the oath, see him. In his evidence, he told the court that he could not even disclose his position at the time of the shooting because he would be putting himself in the spotlight, giving up his identity, and be in fear of his safety. The accused man was convicted, but the Court of Appeal recently set the conviction aside in order to retrial. And in the process, they observed, as the previous Court of Appeal did, that Section 11.4 of the Act, by Section 11.4 of the Act, the court cannot require the witness to be screened to such an extent that the witness cannot be seen by the magistrate, the judge, or other members of the court, if any, or the jury if there is one. Today, sir, we are seeking to amend Section 11.4 of the Act so that the prosecutor or the defendant, it is important to say, prosecutor or the defendant, may apply to the judge to permit a witness to be seen and heard in his natural voice by a magistrate or by a magistrate's panel or by the judge, but not by the prosecutor, not by the other party, which may be the defendant, not by the other attorney, and not by the jury. Speaker, the Attorney General and the Director of Public Prosecutions are of the view that by passing this amendment, the passing of this amendment is critical to protecting witnesses who give evidence before our courts in these very serious matters. That is, murder cases, manslaughter cases, some of the Dangerous Drugs Act, trafficking in persons, those types of offenses. Today, sir, many ordinary Bahamians are shying away from even serving on juries, as those of us who have practiced law know, because of their fear that accused persons will see, threaten, and intimidate them. It is therefore not surprising that many witnesses will not give evidence unless they are permitted to do so anonymously. We have a relatively small, homogeneous country. Everyone knows everyone else. And we saw that in debate here. We saw how passions can rise because we are against each other politically, but we still are friends in many cases. So everyone knows everyone else, and everyone knows everyone else's family in this country of ours. After the trial, witnesses have to go back to their communities after they have exposed themselves as witnesses. Police cannot be with them 24 hours a day. We can see why in this day and age, giving evidence in that type of case against a person that you alleged you saw committing murder can be frightening. So, Mr. Speaker, we have brought this amendment here for approval by this Parliament, and we trust that all members will support it. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, I want to enlighten colleagues to what I...
And now we take you to the House of Assembly for live proceedings. We'll see you afterwards.
Think on these things. These particular promises were inspired for me to pass on to our honorable members this morning. Isaiah 43:16-21. Thus said the Lord, who makes a way through the sea and a path through the mighty waters, who brings forth chariot and horse, army and mighty warrior. They lie down together, they cannot rise. They are extinguished, they are quenched, like a lamp wick. Do not earnestly remember the former things, neither consider the things of old. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive and know it? And will you not give heed to it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The beasts of the field honor me, the jackals and the ostriches, because I give waters in the wilderness and rivers in the desert to give drink to my people, my chosen, the people I formed for myself, that they may set forth my praise, and they shall do it. 1 Peter 2:9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a dedicated nation, God's own purchased special people, that you may set forth the wonderful deeds and display the virtues and perfections of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And we shall praise the Lord. Psalms 150, 1-6. Praise ye the Lord. Praise God in his sanctuary. Praise God in this honorable House of Assembly. Praise him in the firmament of his power. Praise him for his mighty acts. Praise him according to his excellent greatness. Praise him with the sound of the trumpet. Praise him with the psaltery and harp. Praise him with timbrel and dance. Praise him with the stringed instruments and organs. Praise him upon the loud cymbals. Praise him upon the high-sounding cymbals. Let everything that hath breath praise the Lord. Let everything that hath breath shall we pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your wide and varied promises on which we stand. And we can rely upon. We thank you that you have sent to this honorable house men and women of like-minded faith who have a desire that our nation come under the lordship of Jesus Christ, who alone can save our nation from the hand and influence of the evil one who came to kill, steal, and to destroy. But our Lord Jesus Christ came that we may have life and have it more abundantly. In the midst of our wide and varied challenges, in our various islands and city, from these walls we speak peace and love and prosperity, restoration and revival, and a move of the Holy Spirit. Now, Father, thank you for bringing our Prime Minister, Dr. Minnis, and our delegation safely home from their travels abroad, conducting business on behalf of our nation. Good seeds were planted, which are already bearing positive fruit. The world has been told what this nation stands for, and our doors are wide open to welcome business persons and of goodwill and character from around the world. We thank you for the new and powerful things coming our way because of the testimony of our leaders abroad by our Prime Minister. Now, Father, may our honorable members find these sessions of Parliament to be fruitful and encouraging and uplifting, and a cause for them to report back to their various constituency to have faith in God, and to assure them that better days are ahead for our nation. We so declare it in Jesus' name. Grant to our honorable members, government and opposition alike, strength and divine enablement to carry out their duties effectively, with love and with grace, decently and in order. And continue to undergird our honorable Speaker, Dwight Holson Moultrie, with strength, patience, and wisdom to guide our honorable members in the manner in which they ought to govern themselves, to continue to maintain the decorum and dignity for which this honorable house stood and stands for lo these hundreds of years of parliamentary procedures. We would fail to pray if we did not remember those who have the rule over us, inclusive of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, head over the Commonwealth of Nations, and our Queen's representative over our nation, our own Governor General, Dame Marguerite Pindling. Grant them both strength and wisdom to endure and to end strong their various assignments. Grant to our government ministers wisdom beyond their years, that they may lead their assigned ministries in a manner that will make our Bahamas proud. And grant to every member of Parliament divine favors, that they may accomplish their objectives set out in their various constituency. Nothing is impossible when we put our faith in God. Keep safe the families of our members of Parliament while they are away, and meet them at the point of their needs. Finally, I pray for the Christian church, that we will be one even as you and the Father one. Will thou not revive us again, that thy people may rejoice in thee? Revive us again, and fill each heart with thy love, and may every soul be rekindled with fire from above. May the Holy Spirit lead, guide, and direct our honorable members' proceedings today. For we ask it in Jesus' name, who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. Today our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not in temptation. Deliver us from For thine is the kingdom, power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Dr. Dwayne Sands, Marvin Dames, Frankie Campbell, Dionisio Diagula, Michael Pintard, Darren Henfield, Romuald Ferreira, Denisha Roll, Renzo Roll, Ellsworth Dodson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Lakeisha Parker Edgecombe, Iram Lewis, Carlton Boleg, James Aubrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Young, Michael Coates, Miriam Reckley Emmanuel, Reese Chipman, Reuben Ramey, Ricky Mackey, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Charnel Ferguson, Leonard Hannah Martin, Tyso Foss, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members. Firstly, I'd like to recognize the presence of the hierarchy of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and to recognize the Commissioner of Police and his delegation who have joined us for the proceedings this morning. I read somewhere, I don't recall the author's name, that if a man's education is finished, he is finished. If a man's education is finished, he is finished. And at this time, I would like to publicly thank the best university in the world, the University of the Bahamas, for hosting its parliamentarian alumni to a reception on Monday evening at the Royal Blue Golf Club Tavern of Bahama. It was an extremely exciting evening. We had the opportunity to view a video of the progress of the College of the Bahamas into the University of Bahamas, and I can assure all members and the public that the university is making great strides towards its projected objectives. And at this time, I would like to call on the former president of the College of the Bahamas, University of the Bahamas Alumni Association, and the member of our deputy speaker, the member for Tall Pines. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Tall Pines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I think you would have introduced this parliament this morning in a most fitting way when you mentioned the world's best university, and you would have just reminded our country and our members of the University of the Bahamas' invitation to its alumnus or its alumni to reception on Monday. I would just like to, Mr. Speaker, take this opportunity to join you in thanking President Smith and the team from the University of the Bahamas for welcoming us and greeting us in the manner in which they did at Bahama. Mr. Speaker, I want to at this time invite those members who did not attend. You should find in your seats, Mr. Speaker, a gift that we would have received from the University of the Bahamas. And through the president, the university wants you to ensure as proudly and as much times as you can to wear your Alumni Association shirts, enjoy the gift, and to obviously, Mr. Speaker, as you wear your national flag, to wear your UB pin. Mr. Speaker, I think we must be reminded, Mr. Speaker, that in this honorable House, 13 members of Parliament. In the Senate, 5 senators. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution dictates or says that the cabinet should be made up of 9 members plus the 8 plus the Prime Minister. In the cabinet of the Bahamas, there are 4 cabinet ministers. Speaker, in this honorable House, there's a Speaker, there's a Deputy Speaker. And I must say, having more than a quarter of the members of this honorable House, I think UB could almost put a good fight for, if they really want to put it together, we could be a Majesty's Law opposition. Not putting anything in anybody's head. Speaker, not putting anything in anyone's head. Mr. Speaker, we already have the good member, the member for the environment, the Minister for the Environment. We could end garbage collected in the country, Mr. Speaker, except for tar pines, of course. Speaker, we could actually have our allies around the world in the member for North Abago, an alumnus of the college. Speaker, the Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, an alumnus of the university. Speaker, we would have no opposition, Mr. Speaker, because in fact the deputy leader of the opposition, the leader of the opposition business in the House, no opposition. Speaker, UB is full covered in this honorable House, and I want to remind them, as the Minister of Education obviously does as much as he can, of our commitment to them, our commitment to be proud alumnus of this institution, and we want to thank them, Mr. Speaker, and assure them that every opportunity we have to stand in this House and in the Senate, we will represent the University of the Bahamas in the most honorable way. So thank you, President Smith. Thank you, University of the Bahamas, and we look forward to always representing you and always remind the Bahamian people and the world that we have the best university in the world, in the University of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. An Honorable Member, as we support the University of the Bahamas with the way we address ourselves, the University of the Bahamas also needs our financial support, and whatever we can do, at least I would recommend that whatever we can do to assist in that regard, all members, particularly those who have had the benefit of the training at the university, should consider whatever financial assistance we can render to the University of the Bahamas. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Bahamas Registered Stock Act 362, the Bahamas Registered Stock Directions 2018, Bahamas Registered Stock 2038.
Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Bahamas Registered Stock Act 362, the Bahamas Registered Stock Direction 2018, Bahamas Registered Stock 2019. And because there are two that are similar, I'll just read it, Mr. Speaker.
Yes. The
following directions are hereby given under Section 6 of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act in respect of an issue of registered stock to be made in 2018. The stock shall be as follows: rate of interest 2.63%, Bahamas Registered Stock 2019, the amount $75 million, issue price $100. The stock shall be in units of $100. Interest shall be payable half yearly commencing on the 28th of September 2018 and thereafter on 28th March and 28th of September in every year until the stock is repaid. And I'll skip to item number 7, again, which gives the differentiation between the next one I will lay. The stock shall be repaid on the 28th of March in the year appearing in the name of the stock or any earlier date to be determined by the minister. The conditions for each redemption are that 3 months written notice shall be given to the stockholders to be affected, and that redemption shall be on the interest payments dated 28th March or 28th of September.
Thank you. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. For the laying of documents by minister, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last one, the Bahamas Registered Stock Act 362, the Bahamas Registered Stock Direction 2018, Bahamas Registered Stock 2019. And I'll read the relevant sections again, Mr. Speaker. Interest rate 2.63. Bahamas Registered Stock 2019, 75 million at $100 issue price. Stock units, $100. Interest shall be payable half yearly commencing on the 27th of October 2018, and thereafter on the 27th April and 27th October in each year until the stock is repaid. And again, moving to item number 7 in the order, the stock shall be repaid on the 27th April in the year appearing in the name of the stock or any earlier date to be determined by the minister. The conditions for early redemption are that 3 months written notice shall be given to the stockholders to be affected, and the redemption shall be on the interest payment dates of the 27th of April or 27th of October.
Thank you. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Ives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Industries Encouragement Approved Product, O Natural Aromatherapy Order 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table a copy of table of the House a copy of the Industries Encouragement Approved Manufacturer O Natural Aromatherapy Order 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to promote greater...
Oh.
This room is on. Yeah, don't you have a start? Yeah, but you can go to the
Mr. Speaker, I'll wait until we reach communication. I want to communicate the whole process with the inner city structuring.
Thank you, honorable member. Further laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Seabreeze.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning once again. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for this opportunity, and I rise very briefly to bring to the attention of this honorable House, Mr. Speaker, the fact that this month of April, Mr. Speaker, here in the Bahamas, we recognize Child Protection Month. Mr. Speaker, we are under the theme, we care, we share, prevent child abuse. Mr. Speaker, the rights of children, their protection, their safety is very, very vital to not only the growth of our country, but the future of our nation and its sustainable development. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that records reflect that right here in the Bahamas, children are subject to and even victims of child abuse, child molestation, inhumane treatment and degrading treatment and child neglect, and even incest. Mr. Speaker, we are concerned because there are reports of these incidences, or proliferation rather, throughout the Family Islands. Mr. Speaker, preventing child abuse, eliminating and eradicating all forms of abuse against children is everybody's business. It's not my business or your business or their business, but Mr. Speaker, it is our business. The children are our future. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Social Services, together with the Child Protection Council and the SCANS unit, the Ministry of Health, have coordinated a host of activities to raise awareness to the need for our government, our communities, and all stakeholders to play their role and do their part in preventing, eradicating, and eliminating child abuse. Mr. Speaker, promoting awareness, in case it was not known, but promoting awareness of the rights of the child and their protection is provided and mandated under the Child Protection Act 2007. Mr. Speaker, during the press conference held as we opened Child Protection Month, it was indicated that thus far we have seen a decrease in the amount of reports with respect to child abuse. However, I would wish for the country to note that one child abused is one child too many. And so, Mr. Speaker, we seek to fully eradicate child abuse against children. Mr. Speaker, internationally there are reports of child prostitution and child trafficking and child labor. All of these, Mr. Speaker, are acts, Mr. Speaker, that are degrading, and Mr. Speaker, that should not be tolerated at or on any level. During my time, Mr. Speaker, at the Women's Forum that held alongside the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting last week, we have indicated, and it was shared, that a greater number of females, our girls, are subject to abuse rather than males. But Mr. Speaker, I hasten to add at the same juncture that where we have the level of violence against our boys, we are concerned, Mr. Speaker, that they too require equal protection under the law, and we must recognize their need as boys. And so, Mr. Speaker, our women, our boys, and our girls, these are vulnerable groups, Mr. Speaker, and so we want to recognize the need, and we are grateful to have the top team of the Royal Bahamas Police Force here that continues to lead the charge in ensuring that these abuses do not happen, and for persons who actually engage in such activities, they ensure that they are brought speedily before the courts. And so I want to thank them for the work that they have done and continue to do for our children in this country. Mr. Speaker, I've indicated, Mr. Speaker, at that press conference, this sort of chant: if you see it, say it. If you hear it, tell it. Child abuse is everybody's business, Mr. Speaker. Child neglect is the highest among the abuses recorded here in the country. And I want to take this opportunity also, Mr. Speaker, to recognize and thank the hardworking director and members of the Department of Social Services, officers rather, for providing care to these children that are left abandoned and neglected almost on a daily basis, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes they take children to the hospital and they don't want to come back for them, and sometimes they leave the children on the streets and social services have to pick them up, Mr. Speaker. This is very, very important. The children are our future, and so I want to thank those custodians and caregivers at the Children's Emergency Hospital, the Ranfurly Home for Children, Grand Bahama Children's Home, the Nazareth Center, Bilney Lane Children's Home. Mr. Speaker, these individuals who work 24/7, they have to work 24/7 to protect and keep these children, Mr. Speaker, who have been abandoned and neglected. I say it here, I've said it before, and I indeed will say it again until there is no more recording or instances of child abuse. If you see it, you have a duty to say it, and if you hear it, you have a duty to tell it. We must care, Mr. Speaker. We have a duty to share, according to the Child Protection Act and according to our own moral obligation, any information that we have to detect, to prevent, and to respond to child abuse. And so we look forward to the support of the entire public to be on one accord with the Department of Social Services as we seek to care, to share, and prevent child abuse 2018 Child Protection Month. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, is that document available to be tabled? Order that the document be brought up. Honorable Member, if it is not in the proper form yet, you can, yes, you can send a proper version to the clerk. Further statements and communications by ministers. Order that the document do lie on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As
the chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Mr. Ferreira is out of town, Mr. Speaker, then we reach the portion of the agenda laying first reading. I would lay those documents for Minister Ferreira. But at this particular time, Mr. Speaker, I want to read a communication to the House. Mr. Speaker, I've always said that there are several things that are very personal to me. I've spoken of the inner city being personal, as that is where I am from. I've spoken about poverty being very personal to me, being a descendant of poverty, and the family islands, and especially the young people, haven't learned that in the Commonwealth nations, 60% of the population of the Commonwealth nations are less than 30 years old, which is very significant. But, Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to lay before the Honorable House the white paper on the Over the Hill Community Development Partnership Initiative. This paper, Mr. Speaker, lays out my government's policy objectives for the rejuvenation of Over the Hill communities and marks the beginning of 2 months of broad-based consultation. Mr. Speaker, in 2014, I uttered the words, and I quote, "We can transform our inner city communities in ways only dreamt about," end quote. Upon becoming Prime Minister in May 2017, it was therefore my time to act and not just to dream. This has been a key priority of my government, and I am humbled to present this document to the Bahamian people. The Over the Hill area, Mr. Speaker, historically was the epicenter of cultural and social development in New Providence, particularly for those Bahamians of African descent. The community produced so many of our labor leaders, our teachers, our physicians, and of course our politicians. Its residents endured the booms and busts of this turbulent economy over the many decades since the end of slavery with tremendous resilience and dignity. This community, Mr. Speaker, maintained their pride in the distinction and rich cultural heritage which made them who they were. And we know that things have changed considerably now. So many who stayed in this area fell on hard economic times. We also know that there is high incidences of crime and poverty, exacerbated by poor infrastructure, the abandonment of the area by many traditional families, and the increasing impoverishment of the environment by dilapidated housing and illegal garbage and waste disposal. We also know, Mr. Speaker, that no government has consistently invested what needed to be invested on a sustained basis to ensure that this community could continue to thrive. History is replete with many announced but unsustained projects, such as the Grantstown Renewable Project in the mid-1980s. My government is determined to change this. In October 2017, I instructed my office to build a sustainable program around 3 key objectives. 1, ensuring a safer over-the-hill community. 2, ensuring a cleaner over-the-hill community. And 3, encouraging inclusive economic and social empowerment through community development. My office, Mr. Speaker, created a program around 6 key pillars. That is social empowerment, economic empowerment, rejuvenation, smart technology, green and sustainable technology, and programs for youth and the elderly. Let's look at social empowerment, Mr. Speaker. Critical to social empowerment is the process to become more self-resilient and to comprehensively address poverty. Our programs will deal with poverty reduction, skills upgrading and job training, supporting employment opportunities for residents, supporting community building, health and wellness programs, and crime reduction. These efforts, Mr. Speaker, will involve strengthening the social support systems and facilities for families within the over-the-hill community. We will be mapping and assessing existing social support services, improving access to support, strengthening broader social assistance programs, and coordinating with existing programs to ensure that our community centers are better utilized to meet key needs. We will work with other partners inside and outside of government to improve the employability of the over-the-hill residents. One tangible program is to facilitate the training of over-the-hill residents to gain driver's licenses and to assist with other forms of identification. We must improve child care options for working parents in the over-the-hill community. We want to improve access to health care services, including primary, mental, and family planning services, and also services for those with substance abuse disorders and gambling addictions. We will support healthy eating and living initiatives. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we want to take back our over-the-hill streets. We will strengthen community policing and go after illegal gun possessions and strengthen programs such as the Rangers and the Police Cadet Corps. We will be increasing our surveillance for known drug dealers, gun offenders, repeat offenders, and child molesters in order to make our streets safer. Mr. Speaker, in the area of economic empowerment, through this initiative, the government of the Bahamas is introducing the concept known as the empowerment zone. This concept is well known throughout the world and relates to areas designated because of economic hardship for special incentives. It is imperative, Mr. Speaker, that the zones ensures good corporate social responsibility and also that there is a sunset clause so that it doesn't become a permanent zone. The over-the-hill area will become the first empowerment zone in the Bahamas. The incentives outlines will apply to residential properties, both owned and rented, commercial and industrial undertakings with an aggregate turnover of $5 million or less, and all enterprises whose primary income is not, and I repeat, is not derived from the business of gaming or the sale of alcohol. For those qualified residents and business owners, with respect to the redevelopment of land and buildings, the following is proposed. 1, exemptions from real property taxes, exemptions from customs duties related to construction, equipping, and completing buildings and structures for a specified period, exemptions from excise taxes, and exemptions from stamp tax imposed on real property. In terms of business taxes, the following relates for all applicable businesses, with the exception of those engaged in restricted activities, and upon obtaining a trade certificate which will prove that you are located in the zone, you will be afforded a 100% waiver of the assessed business license tax. You will also be exempted from customs duties for the purchase of a vehicle for use in your business with appropriate markings. Mr. Speaker, good corporate social responsibility is essential in this program. We want to see our over-the-hill businesses who are benefiting from the generous provisions give back to their community in a beneficial manner. Mr. Speaker, our programs for the over-the-hill economic empowerment pillar will also include support for small and medium-sized businesses, building local business and financial literacy in the community, and creating opportunities for residents to invest in the cultural assets of the community. In addition to the planned works for Southern Recreation Grounds, we have plans for a large state-of-the-art pavilion to host cultural events for residents and tourists. With respect to rejuvenation, Mr. Speaker, we know that the physical environs of the over-the-hill is not where it should be. While there are many gems in the community, there are also many rough stones. Over the past months, the people have witnessed a massive cleanup effort in the community. We plan to make this more consistent, and we need to increase existing waste collection efforts in the community. We are planning to restore public spaces and recreational facilities. Two other key aspects of this component include working on improving housing in the over-the-hill community and a water for all strategy to eliminate the need for standpipes and the outside toilets by the year 2025. Mr. Speaker, when we look at green and smart technology, we have developed programs around the smart solutions to make better use of technology and of alternative energy. I have instructed the Ministry of Works and the Beaches and Parks Authority to work together to ensure upgrades to parks and to ensure that our parks will have free Wi-Fi. This is to be accessible to all over-the-hill residents. Mr. Speaker, education has now become digital, and it's essential that our over-the-hill community are part of this digital revolution. 2 parks in the over-the-hill area are scheduled to begin refurbishment in June of this year. With respect to youth and the elderly, finally, Mr. Speaker, we will focus on programs that will support both youth and the elderly. Mr. Speaker, the Over-the-Hill Community Development Partnership Initiative is about making partnerships with groups already working in the community. We are not about reinventing programs or taking over programs. We seek to work with existing programs in the community. If you are already doing something positive, please let us know, and we will do our best to assist you. If you are from the community and want to do something, please reach out to us and we will assist. We are working with the church community, civil society, the University of Bahamas, and with the private sector to revitalize our beloved over-the-hill communities. Through these sustained initiatives, we hope to see a rebirth of the values, beauty, and economic viability of the over-the-hill community. This will realize a reduction or eradication of violent, drug-related, and petty crimes. We also hope, Mr. Speaker, to stimulate the return of traditional families to improve and rebuild their ancestral homesteads. And further, Mr. Speaker, the reinvigoration of businesses, job opportunities, coupled with the rebirth of cultural facilities, will stimulate higher living standards and will ultimately improve the quality of life for residents of the over-the-hill community. Mr. Speaker, I am happy this morning. I am pleased to table for this Parliament the White Paper 2018 for the rejuvenation and rebuilding of the over-the-hill community.
Order that the communication and the white paper be brought up. Order that the documents to lie on the table. Further statements and communication by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
There are none, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First readings of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Mr. Speaker, I will introduce these first readings. Minister Ferrero, who's not here, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to promote greater access to affordable housing through the grant of certain exemptions for the building of dwelling homes of serviced lots within a government-owned subdivision. This applies only to subdivision that we do it now.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to promote a greater access to affordable homes through the grant of certain exemptions for the building of dwelling homes on service lot within the government-owned subdivisions. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to promote greater access to affordable homes through the grant of certain exemptions for the building of dwelling homes on service lots within a government-owned subdivision. Wait a second, before the first reading.
Before the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to provide for country-by-country reporting of profit or losses attributed to entities incorporated or resident within the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, just of note, this is a bill that seeks to address the concerns of the OECD and the European Union with respect to our obligations in cooperation on international tax matters.
Thank you, honorable member. Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for country-by-country reporting of profit or losses attributed to the entities incorporated or resident within the Bahamas. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for country-by-country reporting of profit or losses attributed to entities incorporated or resident within the Bahamas.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just to further clarify on that bill, it only applies to multinational entities with revenues over $850 million. So, and it does not require income tax, imposition of income tax in the Bahamas, which I think is a concern for some. It does not require income taxes, and it only applies to multinational entities over $850 million. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave. Yeah, per year. Yeah, 850 million per year. Yeah. So it targets a very specific group of businesses, and so I just want to make that clear because it's obviously a concern for some. Mr. Speaker, we'll get into the debate of that bill when we get there. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Register of Beneficial Ownership Bill 2018, a bill for an act to provide for a Register of Beneficial Ownership.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for the Register of Beneficial Ownership. Order that the bill be, as many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for a register of beneficial ownership.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro.
Mr. Speaker, I rise and beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following bills. A bill for an act to criminalize terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the financing of terrorism and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, to provide for the detection, prevention, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such activities and the confiscation, forfeiture, and seizure of assets of those involved in such activities and for related matters.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to criminalize terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the financing of terrorism, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, to provide for the detection, prevention, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such activities, and the confiscation, forfeiture, and seizure of assets of those involved in such activities and for related matters. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be introduced and read for the first time.
A bill for an act to criminalize terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the financing of terrorism, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, to provide for the detection, prevention, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such activities and the confiscation, forfeiture, and seizure of assets of those involved in such activities and for related matters.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro.
Mr. Speaker, I rise and beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following bill. A bill for an act to amend the Juries Act.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Juries Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Juries Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no more further first readings.
Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Mount Moriah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Go on.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, just before you begin.
As many. Chair recognizes Mount Moriah.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and good morning to you, sir.
Morning.
Honorable members. Mr. Deputy Speaker, permit me please to acknowledge, I know it was done already by the Speaker, the presence of our Commissioner of Police and members of his executive team who are present with us in this honorable house this morning. And their presence is noteworthy given the bill that we intend to debate today, and the significance and the importance of that bill to the work that these fine men and women are doing throughout our country. And we are grateful to the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, Her Majesty's Correction Service, the Customs Department and the Immigration Department, and all of the other stakeholders who daily toil to ensure that we are safe within our communities and by extension throughout our nation. There are some members of the Commissioner's team who is not here this morning, and the reason for that is that sometime early hours of this morning, there was another major operation island-wide. While you all were asleep in your beds, dreaming and thinking about your plans for the day, the men and women of the Royal Bahamas Police Force and the Defense Force were out there during the early hours of the morning, keeping us all safe. And for that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are eternally grateful. And for that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are here today to give them another tool that will allow them to further solidify their hold on crime in this country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise in this honorable House of Assembly because of the good people of the great constituency of Mount Moriah, whom I represent and have been afforded the privilege to serve. I thank them for reposing their confidence in me, and without question, I thank God for enabling me to serve. I also stand here representing the hard-working civil servants at the Ministry of National Security and agencies under my remit, which is comprised of the brave men and women who are a part of the respective law enforcement agencies throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. These courageous officers on a daily basis put their lives on the line to uphold the sovereignty and the security of this small nation of ours. And for that we are grateful. It is, therefore, heartening to be here to present a bill that will undoubtedly result in additional marked changes of successes as they carry out their daily duties. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I stand here today in this honorable place to give my contribution to the Interception of Communication Bill 2017, a comprehensive contemporary law to fight sophisticated technology, savvy criminals, and dismantle their criminal networks. From the outset, let me dispel this ridiculousness of the Interception of Communication Bill being referred to as a spy bill. For all within hearing distance of my voice, I don't care where it's coming from. I don't care where it's coming from. I am standing here today and speaking. For all within hearing distance of my voice, it is not, and I will explain in my contribution here this morning. The word spy connotates breaking the law and impinging upon the constitutional rights of an individual. The mere fact that we are here in this honorable House debating this very important bill represents an urgent need to send a clear message that this government, a Hubert Minnis-led government, is committed to adhering to the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the rule of law, and in no case assuming the posture of politics of disrespect and arrogance. So let us examine for a minute, if you will. If it is our intent to act ultra vires of the laws of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and not in good faith, then the question that should be asked is, why are we here today in this honorable place setting out a case to the Bahamian people for the need for such a critical piece of legislation? A responsible government does not come to Parliament to inform its citizens and pass legislation only to ignore the very legislation it was responsible for bringing to Parliament. This does not make sense, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The entire absurdity of the Interception of Communication Bill being referred to as a spy bill needs to be put to perpetual rest. This Interception of Communication Bill is timely and pertinent to our national security and well-being as a nation. The foremost aim of this bill is to thwart any and all national security threats to Bahamian citizens, residents, and visitors of this great country that we love so much, the Bahamas. This bill is a vital tool to assist in our crime-fighting strategies, particularly in combating drug, human, and gun trafficking, gun violence, gang violence, cybercrime, and other forms of transnational organized crimes. Without legislation such as this one, law enforcement agencies will be severely handicapped and disadvantaged in their attempts to detect, collect, analyze, investigate, and prosecute associated crimes in a world where technology-related platforms have become the preferred means of communication across the globe, especially for organized crime organizations. Therefore, the question we must now ask ourselves is, who do we prefer to have the upper hand? Organized crime groups, or the men and women of law enforcement who have taken an oath to protect us all? Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Interception of Communication Bill seeks to provide a single legal framework within which the interception of all communications on public and private systems would be authorized, inclusive of public telecommunication operators and internet providers. The bill provides for the interception of communications carried wholly or partly by wireless telegraphy, and also covers all mail handling systems, including parcel and courier services. This bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, further provides for the use of certain devices for listening to private conversations. The bill, once passed, will come into operation on a day decided by the minister and will publicly announce. Have you read it? Mr. Speaker, communications as defined in the bill includes anything transmitted by means of a postal service, including a postal article. Anything comprising speech, music, sound, visual images, or data of any description, and signal serving either for the importation of anything between persons, between a person and a thing, or between things for the actuation or control of any apparatus. Intercepts or interception, as defined in this bill, includes oral or other acquisitions of the contents of any communication throughout the use of any means, including an interception device, so as to make some or all of the contents of a communications available to a person other than the sender or recipient or intended recipient of that communication. Monitoring of a communication by means of a monitoring device, viewing, examining, or inspecting of the contents of any communications, and diverting of any communications from its intended destination to another destination. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the last 2 decades, information and communication technologies have continued to advance, thus highlighting the critical need for the collection of data to be used as a driver to protect and enhance the national security interests. The smartphone, which can be referred to as one of the most personal computers, is owned by approximately 2.5 billion of the world's population, according to Statista, a leading provider of consumer data. The Pew Research Center, a non-partisan fact tank, found in a recent study that an estimated, and this is an example, 95% of all Americans own cell phones. Nearly 3/4 of American adults own desktops or laptops. Half of the adult population own tablets, and around 1 in 5 owned e-readers. I suspect, therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that in the Bahamas, the use of IT is widespread, and almost everyone today owns a cell phone, even the kid in school. With this ever-increasing use of communication gadgets and its rapid evolution, it is imperative that legislation allow law enforcement to keep pace with the changing technology and prevent criminals from abusing communication devices to commit offenses. This is the principal intent of this bill. The necessity for law enforcement to address dangers posed by criminals using advanced technologies such as newer encrypted forms of internet-based communications, computers, iPads, smartphones, and the likes. I can speak personally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of experiences in which police acting on intelligence successfully pursued criminal networks throughout our country. It was not uncommon for criminal groups, in their attempt to evade law enforcement, to have had multiple disposable prepaid phones, which they were able to quickly discard so as to evade detection. This modus operandi is nothing new and will only increase in occurrences. As such, we have to equip law enforcement agencies with the applicable legislative tools to remain relevant and collect the necessary investigative information by way of modern platforms for the sole purpose of protecting the local as well as the national security interests of the people they have sworn to protect. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the matter at hand is the interpretation of Communication Act previous, applied only to telephone wiretaps for landlines, but basically applicable for old model cell phones, making the bill limited to only antiquated forms of communications. Therefore, the interpretation of Communication Bill 2017 needs to make law to provide for a legal interception of emails and other forms of communications over the internet and other technological devices. Without the enactment of this bill, law enforcement personnel would not be able to utilize the latest in law enforcement techniques and equipment to match the reach, resources, or sophistication of organized criminal groups. This will undoubtedly lead to a major regression in all of the gains made by law enforcement, especially in recent times, thereby exposing our beautiful nation to untold risks such as economic, reputational, and damage to our social fabric. These are risks that we cannot afford to take if we are committed to building a nation that is respected and focused on securing a future for successive generations. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in a 2013 ABC News online article titled NSA, over 50 terror plots foiled by data dragnets, former Director of National Security Administration, General Keith Alexander, told the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence that more than 50 potential terrorist attacks on U.S. soil were stopped due to the vast swaths of telephone metadata and internet data collected daily by the NSA since 9/11. In the same article, former FBI Deputy Director Sean Joyce said in his testimony before the panel that in 2009, using Section 702 authority of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, granted to intercept communications, federal authorities intercepted an email from a terrorist located in Pakistan who was corresponding with an individual in Denver, Colorado. Acting on information intercepted through emails, the authorities identified the suspected terrorist as Najibullah Zazi and tracked him to New York City, where they executed search warrants and found bomb-making components. Zazi was arrested and later confessed to a plot to bomb New York subway system. We cannot allow any incidents of this nature to occur on our peaceful shores. As a responsible government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have an obligation to the people of this great nation to enact legislations such as the one we are debating here today that will provide law enforcement with the necessary tools to stay ahead of those hell-bent on destroying our nation in the name of greed and selfishness. We cannot and should not send a message to criminal elements that we are not prepared to follow them or match or even exceed their resources to wherever they go to safeguard the security of our nation and the interests of our nation and the people of our nation. This would be a catastrophic error, Mr. Deputy Speaker, resulting in devastating consequences for our little nation. Are we prepared to surrender or risk it all for those with their hidden agendas? Or are we prepared and committed to protecting the reputational and national security interests of our nation, the only nation we know? And the only way we make that possible is if we put systems in place to circumvent crime and terrorist activities. I am in no way suggesting that terrorist attacks will ever occur on our shores. But what I would like to emphasize, however, is that organized criminals and terrorist groups, for example, do not have to live or work in the Bahamas to compromise or wreak havoc on our way of life. The rise of new information communication technology in the last decade of the 20th century have continued into the 21st century, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Bahamas, like many countries around the world, have been plagued by cybercrime related to new technologies. The activities of communication technologies is one of the biggest challenges in the 21st century. Its global impact is felt in every corner of the earth, from mega corporations to everyday citizens. Crimes related to communication technologies at its bare minimum, includes damage and destruction of data, stolen money, theft of personal and financial data, embezzlement, fraud, forensic investigation, deletion of hacked data, software, and reputational harm. Globally, it is estimated that cybercrime costs some $600 billion annually. It has become the fastest growing transnational crime that is continuously increasing in scope, sophistication, and cost. To date, it is considered more profitable than the global illegal trade of all drugs combined. Specifically, for the Bahamas, the financial sector being our second major industry means that the threats of financial crimes due to technologies have placed a great burden on our safety and security as we aim to foster an economically safe and competitive industry. By 2020, it is expected that 80% of all countries will have cybercrime policies, and it is expected that 30% will have cabinet or government-level positions solely focused on cybercrime. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the time for us to act is now. If we do nothing, then we increase the probability of an attack. And by the time we come to the realization that, wow, we may have made a mistake and we should have been proactive, then it is too late. As legislators, we must put law enforcement in a positive position to make our people less vulnerable and exposed to risks that emanate from far beyond the shores of our nation. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Interception of Communication Bill also repeals the Listening Devices Act of 1972. Speaking as a former police officer, I can confidently say that since the implementation of the Listening Devices Act, we have used it extensively, and never once did we have a complaint of any concern about law enforcement or government operating outside of its scope or targeting law-abiding citizens. There have been safeguards in the past, and this bill offers additional safeguards today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have personally seen the successes of what the Listening Devices Act has done in our fight against crime from a local level, as well as an international level in terms of combating transnational organized crimes and dismantling dangerous criminal networks. Electronic device was key in the successful prosecution of noted criminals. In fact, 8 years ago, a decade-long drug trafficking case saw the extradition of a convicted drug smuggler due to the use of the Listening Devices Act by our Royal Bahamas Police Force. Notwithstanding this, the constitutionality of the Listening Devices Act was brought to the fore. A Bahamian convicted drug trafficker recently challenged the constitutionality of the Listening Devices Act to undermine multinational drug smuggling and weapons possession charges at home, and thereby prevent extradition to the United States to face drug smuggling charges in Florida. The convicted smuggler argument was that the lack of judicial review was a basis to have his charges reversed. After rejection in our courts, his lawyers appealed to the Privy Council in London, which also upheld the constitutionality of the Listening Devices Act. He was subsequently extradited to the United States in December of 2015. If the Listening Devices Act was not upheld by the Privy Council, the use of intercepts a potent tool in investigating all forms of criminal activity, would only be hampered and disrupt investigations by local, regional, and international partners, but could call into question convictions based on evidence obtained under the current law. We cannot, Mr. Deputy Speaker, allow ourselves to be caught in such a position in which our law enforcement agencies may be potentially handicapped, while felons possibly evade justice and impose their will by violence, influence peddling, and corruption. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the world that we are living in today has certainly progressed beyond antiquated listening devices, such as landlines. And as pointed out by the Privy Council in the above-mentioned case, there has to be compatibility of listening devices within 21st century technological advances. In this regard, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill defines a listening device as an instrument or an apparatus, equipment, or device capable of being used to hear, listen, or record a private conversation, but does not include a hearing aid or similar device used by the hearing impaired. Further, the Interception of Communication Bill removes the power of the Minister of National Security to simply order an intercept, but provides for the minister to authorize in writing a listening device to be used by an individual if it is determined that the use is for defense or national security matters of the country. The use of the listening devices to the individual would not extend for more than 30 days. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill also provides for the Commissioner of Police to consult with the Attorney General for the urgent use of wiretaps by a police officer if it is reasonably likely for an offense to occur. The Attorney General will, in writing, agree or reject the request, which cannot exceed 14 days. And we're doing this now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, under the Listening Devices Act, and we have been doing it for many years. If an extension is required after the 14-day period, the Commissioner of Police has to make application to a judge. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill provides for accountability, transparency, and a paper trail. Anyone, including law enforcement, is not above the law. In contravention of this bill, once enacted, is in violation of the law of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and commits a crime. There are absolutely no provisions in this bill for personal agendas. One cannot act outside the law to go after political adversaries, spouses, sweethearts, or anyone else as a matter of fact without consequences. In short, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you are living your life, going about your daily business, not threatening the security of others or the national security of this nation, you have absolutely nothing to be concerned about as it relates to this bill. On the other hand, however, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you are Anglican, then you should be concerned. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this Interception of Communication Bill, once passed, will strike a healthy balance between protecting Bahamians and safeguarding their privacy. As we continue to demonstrate this government's commitment, it should be underscored that we have heard your concerns and have accordingly improved the Interception of Communications Bill from what it once was, just last year, to what it once was when this bill was under the previous administration. When this bill was first tabled by the previous administration in 2017, it allowed the authorized officer, defined as the Commissioner of Police, Director of the National Intelligence Agency, Director of the Investigatory Agency, prescribed by the National Security Minister, or anyone authorized in writing by an authorized officer to apply for an interception warrant for the investigation of any offense. Any offense. What's wrong with that? Well, you can tell me later. Right? As such, as written by the government of yesterday, stealing by reason of employment, planning an illegal political demonstration, an illegal or wildcat strike, a petty crimes would permit law enforcement to intercept your private communications. Is the description of spying, if the description of spying was ever applicable, it was for what the previous administration tabled. And that was why it was used so frequently. Now you have the answer. Our government has restricted the right of the authorized officer to apply or to specify offenses. In other words, only indictable offenses, and not issuance of an interception warrant through expansive grounds for nearly any offense. In the schedule of the Act, the specified offenses are, against Anti-Terrorism Act, Dangerous Drug Act, the Firearms Act, the Sexual Offenses Act, the Prevention of Bribery Act, Computer Misuse Act, Data Protection or Cybercrime, the Protection of Aviation Act, and the Trafficking in Persons Act. The most serious offenses under the Penal Code are murder, kidnapping, extortion, participation in organized criminal groups, and the use of armed forces against the government or a member of Parliament. This bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, also makes provisions to protect information collected and allows criminal penalties for any person who makes an unauthorized disclosure of any confidential intercepted information, and for anyone who receives from someone else any unauthorized disclosure and makes any further unauthorized disclosures, such as reading stolen emails in Parliament. Moreover, this Act calls for any records obtained pursuing to the interception warrant must be destroyed to the extent that pertinent information that could reveal the nature and objectives of the warrant is not revealed. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are still governed by laws, and there is a process to obtaining intercept warrants and entry warrants. When information regarding the commission or intended commission of an indictable offense is suspected, and this information cannot be acquired by any other measure, it is the interest of justice, in the interest of justice and the national security, an intercept warrant or entry warrant can be applied for in writing by an authorized officer, by an authorized officer and may be issued. An authorized officer would make application to the Attorney General to apply to a judge, ex parte, for an order permitting the interception of such communication. The Attorney General, again, has the right to accept or reject the application for the interception if deemed not in the public's interest or in the interest of justice. An affidavit stating the following: the name of the authorized officer on whose behalf the application is made, the facts or allegations to support the application, and sufficient information for a judge to issue an application warrant, among other things, pursuant to Section 4.2, will accompany the application. The intercept warrant will only be issued if the judge is satisfied by the facts in the affidavits necessitated an interception warrant and required for the prevention or detection of a specified offense, among other grounds such as urgency. The judge issuing the order also has the authority to require from the authorized officer to disclose any further information as deemed necessary. It is an offense and liable for summary conviction of a fine not to exceed $20,000 or a 2-year prison sentence for anyone to disclose the existence of an application for an interception warrant other than the authorized officer. The judge will also specify the duration of the warrant, call for a relevant period, meaning 3 months, beginning with the date of the issuance of the interception warrant. A renewal of the warrant may be granted through application in writing and has to be accompanied by an affidavit to justify the renewal. The authorized officer can also request an entry warrant to enter premises and to install a listening device only if an interception warrant could be justified. If the evidence submitted to the judge is weak or the allegations of the commission of a specified offense is weak, no interception warrant would be issued, and subsequently an entry warrant would not be granted. Further, the judge may terminate an interception or an entry warrant for 2 reasons. The first being the authorized officer fails to submit a written report to the judge on the progress made since the warrant, and secondly, if the submitted report by the officer shows that the initial objective of the warrant no longer exists. So these are safeguards. Never had it in the previous act, never had any real issues in the previous act, and so I would suspect now with these additional safeguards, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas can feel secured that they have a government who stands up for their best interests. The interception bill also provides for oral applications to be made to the judge for warrants that are requested as a matter of urgency, whereby a written application and affidavit in support of the warrant should reach the judge within 72 hours of the issuance. While an individual who intentionally intercepts a communication in the course of its transmission in the post or over a communication network, except where permitted by this act, faces a fine not exceeding $500,000, an imprisonment of not more than 4 years. Any postal worker or employee of a communication service providers are required to assist the authorized officer in possession of an interception or an entry warrant and will have immunity from legal action. This bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as stated at the start, is very comprehensive in its scope and also provides for obtaining protected or encrypted data and allows the court to order the provision of an access to a key to the protected information and allows for orders to be made for communication services providers to disclose communications data related to the communication activities of any individual subject to an interception warrant. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Bahamas is not alone in its efforts to use the lawful interception of communications to counter all national security threats and combat all serious crimes. Globally, more specifically, In our region alone, a number of countries have enacted laws to permit the lawful interception of communications in their fight against crime, and all under the same title of Interception of Communication Act. We are lagging somewhat behind in our efforts, as the following countries surpassed us, namely Jamaica in 2002, St. Lucia in 2005, most recently St. Kitts and Nevis passed the Interception of Communication Act in 2011. Internationally, the United Kingdom passed, again using the same title, its Interception of Communication Act in 1985, and Australia passed the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act of 1979. The passage of this act also demonstrates the firm belief that legislative framework is a pivotal key in the deterrence and fight against crime on all fronts. Since taking office, Mr. Deputy Speaker, our government has sought to introduce new or amended legislation inclusive of an act to amend the Traveler's Currency Declaration Act, which provides that departments of customs powers to seize and detain any falsely declared currencies and related items which may be used to support illegal activities. Meanwhile, the Proceeds of Crime and Financial Transaction Reporting Acts will both address money laundering and counterterrorism financing. Specifically, the former seeks to consolidate and strengthen current measures to prevent, investigate matters relating to drugs, theft, money laundering, terrorism financing, terrorism corruption, weapons of mass destruction, and human trafficking. It also seeks, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to provide legislative framework to recover the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime. The latter seeks to repeal and replace the Financial Transaction Act. The new legislation provides better regulation of financial institutions against the use of false identity of persons and institutions which engage in money laundering and terrorism financing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our government also introduced the process of introducing anti-corruption legislation, and this will be certainly groundbreaking. More importantly, it provided law enforcement with the necessary intelligence capacity and tools and avoidance of political interference so that they could address such issues irrespective of one's status or title. The aforementioned and all other legislation hopes to support the Financial Intelligence Unit, which strengthens the initiatives of the relevant agencies responsible for ensuring financial institutions, establish and maintain proper operational practices in compliance with regulatory agencies such as the Central Bank of the Bahamas, the Compliance Commission, Securities Commission, the Registrar of Insurance, and the Gaming Board. Mr. Deputy Speaker, though still early, we have begun to witness positive results in our efforts to reduce crime within our nation. Due to new amended legislation and new enforcement strategies, I am pleased to report for the first quarter of 2018, as a result of a re-energized effort by a re-energized team led by Commissioner Ferguson, Deputy Commissioner Seymour, and the rest of their teams, as well as the Commodore of the Defense Force and his executive team in the prison, customs, and immigration. We are seeing the overall figures trending downward. Still early. There's still a lot to do. Combined, both crimes against the person and the property are down so far, and we're kind of finishing up the first quarter here by 14% nationwide. Specifically, armed robberies are down some 31.8%. Murders to date are down some 45.2%. Stolen vehicles are down some 13%, and the list goes on. With reference to firearms, already for the year, law enforcement have been able to take off of the streets of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas some 102 firearms. Some 3,365 rounds of ammunition, and I may have to change that count after the day because they were out there all morning. I hasten to add that the recent successes are due in part to some short-term strategies, but the Commissioner and his team will be among the first to tell you that there is still a lot of work to be done. And it's not only the job of the Commissioner and his team, and this is why our leader, Dr. Minnis, our Prime Minister, and the rest of the members in this House continue to push very progressive legislation to add to the pot, to motivate law enforcement throughout this country, to energize them, to show them that we support them, to get the people of this nation behind them. And on Monday, our leader will be launching the Neighborhood Watch Crime Council, which is a national program. And I would like to take this opportunity to invite those on the opposite side to be our special guests at that event on Monday. Hometown boy, I got you. Police headquarters, you're a friend. You're always welcome there. You know that. We are, however, encouraged.
The government actually doing something for South Andrews?
Because
they don't get nothing on that side.
We are, however, encouraged because the decreases and other successes are not occurring. These things are not occurring by happenstance, although we are a long way from the finish line, but by careful, thought out, and deliberate changes in the way our legislative agenda and our law enforcement conduct its crime-fighting strategies. New methodologies and our broad approach to crime fighting, law enforcement partnerships, intelligence, building relationships with the communities at large, drug interdiction, gun control, will be the key to making us all safer in this beautiful country of ours. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have to remain relevant in the 21st century. It is the only way that we can be assured that we are safer today than we were yesterday. The forms and modes of communication in today's world are materially different from those contemplated when the original act was passed. So, there still remains much work to be done in our crime-fighting initiatives. A Hubert Minnis-led administration is resolute in launching an effective assault against the criminal element operating throughout our country. And this assault is not only police officers with guns and handcuffs. You heard about the over-the-hill initiative. That's all a part of the crime prevention and crime fighting initiative. This interception of communication bill is yet another one of those progressive and timely bills. The purpose of this interception of communication bill is to assist in the fight against organized crime and to protect the national security interests and reputation of our nation. It is an absolutely critical bill. Once enacted, this will aid in the success of our government's efforts to protect the sovereignty and the national interests of all Bahamians and visitors alike. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I give my support to this Interception of Communication Bill 2017. Mount Moriah. Thanks.
As many. There's their seconder. Vinny, the chair recognizes the member for Yamakro.
Mr. Speaker.
Just 1 second, Yamakro.
I can start when you're ready.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's with... Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it is with a profound sense of gratitude that I stand here today to second the Interception of Communications Bill. Mr. Speaker, I would first like to recognize the great constituency of Yamakro, who sent me here to represent them. I'd also like to highlight an event that's going to occur in the constituency of Yamakro on this weekend, the 28th of April, 2018, and it is the Spring Festival. And I would like to commend the Eastern Community Association for their hard work. There will be a cultural explosion in the constituency of Yamakro, or in the East. And so we invite all of our colleagues from the East, and indeed throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to come and participate. We expect to see Mr. You're special. I'm getting to you. I'm getting to you. No.
You in good company. That's a safe street.
Mr. Speaker, I must confess, South and Central Andros may be the only PLP on that street, but I can tell you some of the most sage and wise advice in terms of political strategy was gained from South and Central Andros. And that's also advice in life, Mr. Speaker. And so I would like to invite, I know that South and Central Andros, who's a real supporter, strong supporter, and resident of the Yamakro community, and he transcends political boundaries. And he shares his experiences, and I'm sure that he will be out there listening to the music, sharing and interacting with others. So we invite all and sundry. We invite Seabreeze. Seabreeze is going to be there. St. Anne's is going to be there. Foxhill is going to be there. And the great doctor. The great doctor is going to be there, Dr. Sands, and most certainly, if God should spare my life, I will be there. And Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why I say that this is it is my distinguished pleasure to make this presentation today, because it gives me an opportunity to recognize persons and an organization that is near and dear to my heart. 1990, I could remember I was then a joiner, filling cabinets. Before that, I was a stevedore, and I got the invitation to join the Royal Bahamas Police Force. And I can tell you, my life has not been the same. As a matter of fact, my dear father, when I went to university, penned a letter to the then Minister of National Security, Mr. Frank Watson, And he thanked him for the opportunity that the force and the good people of the Bahamas had afforded me to invest government funds in me and to allow me to go away to school and to study. And he said that, he told me that he hoped that that investment would prove true and that I would bring pride and honor not just to the Bahamas, but to the Royal Bahamas Police Force. So in the words of my father, I want to say to that august body, I thank you for adopting me, for assisting to educate me, for mentoring me, and for loving me. And so in all the circumstances, I appreciate you and I thank you very much. And may God, and may God continue to bless the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Mr. Speaker, as I move to make my contribution toward in seconding the Interception of Communications Bill, I would just like to set the context in terms of the relevance of this bill. And recently, I had the opportunity to travel to a conference sponsored by the people of the Bahamas, the ITU conference, the International Telecommunications Conference, and WISIS, the World Summit on Information Technology. And from my own private studies, it is reinforced in me that life is a continual learning process. So despite the fact that I have a trade, I have a master's degree, I'm now going to register to go back to school because information technology is moving at a breakneck speed. And the persons who own Google, Facebook, and Amazon, what they're saying is that the technology is changing so fast that they don't have the human capital to keep up with it. And so what the world is saying is that conventional learning is almost out of the door, because you could have a 12-year-old young boy sitting in his room who can develop an app and totally change technology. And so that is where we are. Smart government is the order of the day, where one should be able to do everything on a smartphone, with the exception of registering a birth, getting a notary public, and one other item that slips my mind at this stage. That is where governments have gone, and that is where we're intending to go. But I would like to just draw, and setting the context, I would like to speak to the Industrial Revolution. And we know that the Industrial Revolution basically started about 1,700 years ago. In the 1700s, thank you very much. Steam power, and that's where they had the spin saw. They took cotton and they were able to make clothes. It made industry much easier. And I think I experienced almost all 4 of the industrial revolutions on Cat Island, because I remember when we didn't even have steam power. And then I do recall when we got electricity, and that represents the 2nd industrial revolution, where electricity was then used in the manufacturing process and to speed up the process of how goods and services are traded and moved around the world, and how life was made much more easier. And then we had the 3rd industrial revolution with the computer, the calculator, and whatever have you. And you know, a number of different technologies came in where we are today. Now we are at the brink of the 4th industrial revolution. And this one is extremely significant. And we're just trying to grasp the 3rd industrial revolution. And this one concerns itself with the age of digital biotechnology. The 4th industrial revolution, digital biotechnology, where they're using information to basically put a signature on you, so you will not need passports anymore. Yep. They can be able to diagnose your health and say whether or not you will have hypertension or whatever have you by way of technology. They can even construct homes now by using this technology, depending on how fast the cement can set. So So you could have a machine that just come and print, give you a home. And so that is where we are. And so, Mr. Speaker, the reason why I start by looking at the Industrial Revolution is to reflect on where we are in terms of how the police force is able to confront and interface with technological crimes, having regard to the fact that they are using an act that is some 47 or 46 years old. Mr. Speaker, let me also let public commitment to public consultation. Mr. Speaker, our government, pardon me, has been committed to public consultation. Let me also say that the Office of the Attorney General, which is responsible for advising government during the legislative process, was and is committed to comprehensive public consultation on this bill and other proposed legislation. To inform public consultation, the process on this bill, we hired the nation's premier public consultation firm to look at the Interception of Communications bill and its relevance in the Bahamas. That research revealed that 71% of respondents had never heard of the Interception Communications bill, and 62% of the people had never heard of its more colloquial name, the spy bill. We are also now aware that 80% of the respondents wanted to know more about the Interception of Communications bill and have been giving our office specific directions on the best mediums through which they can be reached. Given the qualitative data we have collected, we look forward to working with our partners like the Bahamas Bar Association and others in the way that we bring legislation to this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I must draw to your attention that the Attorney General Office participated in a public forum along with the Bahamas Bar Association in partnership with the University of the Bahamas. And we looked at the Interception of Communications bill. And I want to commend persons such as Mr. Wayne Monroe QC, Mr. Maurice Clinton QC, Mr. Michael Hilton QC for sitting on that panel. And I was fortunate, Mr. Speaker, to join those persons on that panel and to debate the relevance of the Interception of Communications bill. Mr. Speaker, and what came out of that discussion was the need for the implementation of laws that would enhance the ability and capabilities of the Royal Bahamas Police Force to fulfill their constitutional mandate. And that constitutional mandate, Mr. Speaker, is outlined in the Police Act, because no other organization in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is empowered to prevent, protect, apprehend all offenders against the law and to preserve the peace. That is given to the Commissioner and those officers who have been appointed to assist him. And so in that vein, Mr. Speaker, we had that discussion on that night, and I want to paraphrase Mr. Wayne Monroe QC and his comments. And he indicated that the time has now come for us to stop stalling. Because while we stall, the Royal Bahamas Police Force is armed with a defective tool. And what is that defective tool? The Listening Devices Act. So he hastens the government to go ahead and pass a piece of legislation that would bring crime-fighting techniques and human resources into the 21st century. So, in this vein, that was done to ensure that laws not only reflect the will of the Bahamian people, but comport to the constitutional mandate to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of the Bahamas. Thus, the kinds of debate and public forum that I participated in at the University of the Bahamas deepens consultation on legislative initiatives to encourage greater public participation in the law-making process. Mr. Speaker, my government fully endorsed and has laid the Interception of Communications Bill. And we did that from September of 2017. And the reason why that was done and placed on the government's domain is so that persons could have an opportunity to view, to provide their objections, their concerns to the government, so that we could produce a piece of legislation that is fitted for the governance of the Bahamas. Some basic points about surveillance legislation. Let me begin by making a few observations about surveillance legislation of the kind which is under debate today. The protection of privacy and the freedom of expression are fundamental rights and enshrined under the Constitution of the Bahamas and long recognized under common law. In the 2014 case of Maycock and others, on appeal from this jurisdiction to the Privy Council challenging the constitutionality of the Listening Devices Act, the Privy Council reminded us that privacy and freedom of expression are linked concepts and that both are engaged when considering modes of electronic surveillance law. In fact, it was the Privy Council's less than ringing endorsement of the Listening Devices Act in that case which provided, to some extent, the impetus for the modern surveillance legislation, which we are now debating this morning. Any legislation which intrudes on privacy, freedom of expression, or interferes with correspondence, rights which are considered basic to human existence and dignity, will always be controversial and strongly opposed. All of the jurisdictions which have implemented similar legislation have experienced significant pushback from civil society groups, and in the UK, there is currently a petition for the repeal of the IPA. So, it is expected that there will be some opposition to this bill. And why I say that, why that was placed here, Mr. Speaker, is that we recognize that without proper public consultation, but without proper engagement of civil society, that there could be pushback on the bill. So we went out into the community. We engaged the Bahamas Bar Association. We engaged the nation's chief learning institution, the University of the Bahamas. We engaged one of the nation's chief public investigative polling bodies, and we did work in the community, Mr. Speaker, to teach persons about the Interception of Communications Bill. Public and political opposition to the Information Interception Communication Bill. And this is near and dear to me. Mr. Speaker, in fact, when the last administration introduced the first version of this bill, there was both public and political opposition. Admittedly, given the timing and the manner in which it was tabled in Parliament, I voiced the member of, and I was not then the member for Yamacraw, but I voiced strong opposition to the bill in its previous iteration. And many persons in the society did so too. And I can tell you why, Mr. Speaker. At that stage, at that time, I held a different office. And there was much concerns about persons' private information that actually turned up in this house. And there were explanations given as to how persons' private emails were obtained that really did not hold water. But what was actually being done, or what one could assume, Mr. Speaker, that what was being done was that persons' private information was being obtained in a way that would be outlawed by the same piece of legislation that we are presenting here today. Mr. Speaker, the public outcry did not stop there. The public outcry, Mr. Speaker, did not stop there. I do recall, Mr. Speaker, that that matter came up for consideration by the Honorable Supreme Court. Mr. Speaker, and the backlash that a then sitting justice received as a result of a matter that that had gone on and was appealed was astounding. And so much so, Mr. Speaker, that the then Chief Justice made commentaries of the remarks made by persons in the community who he said should have known better. And in the opening of the legal year 2017, the speech was given 11th of January 2017, the then Honorable Sir Hartman Longley, Chief Justice of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and I quote, under the heading of concerns, state, and I quote, as I close, I end with one concern, and perhaps a familiar refrain. It is my hope that all and the sundry will come to accept in a real way the principle of the independence of the judiciary, not just by paying lip service. I sat in my office the other day and watched in dismay the judgment of Justice Indra Charles, and watching dismay the judgment of Justice Indra Charles was assailed publicly. Matters sub judice are now generally made the subject of comment in Parliament or elsewhere. That is a rule of long standing that is observed throughout the Commonwealth and in most civilized countries. I have said repeatedly, the courts exist to address grievances and disputes. And since we deal with a multi-tiered system, when one is aggrieved by a decision at one level, one may pursue justice at another level of the system. We should not berate and try to demonize and threaten with imprisonment judges who are doing their best. In this regard, I'm reminded of the words of the former Chief Justice, Sir Burton Hall, uttered 10 years ago in the midst of another public controversy, which bears repeating. And since I cannot improve upon them, I quote him. My learned predecessor said on that occasion, and then he went into what his learned predecessor said, and he looked at the independence of the judiciary and the way that it's conducted. And that's what he did. But that was a part of everything that was happening in the community when this bill was laid. It was tabled late on a Wednesday evening, weeks before the general election, and without any significant public consultation. It is no wonder many believed the bill had, and as I described it, a sinister undercurrent. And Mr. Speaker, might I say, if the circumstances presented itself again, and I was in the same office, and the public furor was as it was, and a judge was being assailed, and the Honorable Chief Justice of the Bahamas made such comments, I would again repeat what I said. When examined closely, the bill permitted the interception of communication upon an allegation of the commission of any offense. The broad grounds upon which an interception warrant could be sought under the previous version of the bill left the Bahamian people exposed to the possibility of terrible abuse of power. To remedy this, in the Interception of Communications Bill 2017, we have removed those expansive grounds to seek a warrant merely for any offense. Instead, the current bill is limited to indictable offenses, those crimes that are triable by a jury in the Supreme Court, and to the most serious offenses, such as terrorism, money laundering, armed trafficking, human trafficking, and crimes against the children. Need for modern, comprehensive, and statutory regime for interception of communications. The Listening Devices Act was enacted in 1972 and provides for the interception mainly of telephone conversations. what is known as the wiretapping. And that is the reason why I started with the Industrial Revolution, because the act created in 1972 was designed for a certain period. It didn't contemplate nanotechnology or all of the other things that are going on now. The way that we're going to be trading in currency with bitcoins and all these other things. It did not take into consideration that, because that was not the thinking. And so this is one of the reasons why you had the considerations being made of the act. The Listening Devices Act allows the police to use any instrument, apparatus, equipment, or device capable of being used to hear, listen to, or record a private conversation while it is taking place. Many people, many Bahamians are unaware that the 46-year-old Listening Devices Act allows the Minister of National Security to authorize listening in certain instances at will. And at this stage, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that there's an amendment that is to be introduced to this bill that will deal with the section in the Interception of Communications Bill dealing with the Listening Devices Act as to who will authorize this.
You must be in a very difficult position today.
I'm in an excellent position, just like you are. Similarly, the Controller of Customs, pardon me? Similarly, the Controller of Customs and Commissioner of Police can authorize listening and consultation with the Attorney General, although the consent of the Attorney General is now required. In Maycock, the appellant challenged evidence obtained by Bahamian law enforcement through the interception of the appellant's telephone conversations as authorized under the LDA, Listening Devices Act. While the Privy Council upheld the constitutionality of the Listening Devices Act as being preserved by the Savings Clause of the Constitution, they raised serious concerns about whether the law met current constitutional standards. In fact, the Privy Council found that the current LDA suffers from a lack of independent supervision, both at the initial stage of authorization by the Commissioner and with respect to the lack of arrangements for review and report on the operation of the Act. More pointedly, Lord Mans, who gave the judgment on behalf of the Privy Council, speaking about the Listening Devices Act, said, at paragraph 58 of the ruling, it may be that the Bahamian legislature would wish to reconsider whether it remains appropriate in the modern era. Whether the Bahamian legislature would wish to consider whether the scheme provided by the LDA should now be revised and revisited. Even apart from the deficiencies in the current Listening Devices Act, the need for a modern, comprehensive regulatory regime for the interception of communications to combat modern criminals is evident. The advances in communications technology and its many uses, including the exploitation of modern communications technology by criminals, has made the telephone interception outmoded. And just the other day, but we all know of Mr. Bernie Madoff. Just the other day, there were persons who were taken from Jamaica to the U.S. For crimes. There's 2 minutes. Mr. Speaker. Huh? Okay. Mr. Speaker, the legislation of this kind exists in many large countries, such as the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, as well as regional countries, including Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, St. Kitts, and Nevis. Thus, the debate is really not about the necessity for the legislation. The real challenge is to strike a balance between the reach of the legislation and the protection of the fundamental rights by the appropriate judicial safeguards and other methods. And Mr. Speaker, you know, the case that was in the Supreme Court, that was really the thrust or would underscore the concerns of Bahamian people, being able to trust a government that they would protect the fundamental rights of the Bahamian. And having regard, Mr. Speaker, to the width and breadth of this act and what it is intended to do, Mr. Speaker, I would submit that this is a government, through the Listening Devices Act, who is prepared to protect the fundamental rights of the Bahamians. Okay. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, in the circumstances, the Act provides for penalties for tipping off. It also provides that if there's a breach of the Act, if there's a breach of the Act, Mr. Speaker, there's to be prison term and also stiff penalties. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we have done and we've made certain, Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence for just 2 more minutes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes. I'll wrap up? Thank you very much. Okay, very good. So I will be wrapping up, so I'll deal with much more. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I want to assure members of the public, and I know that there are persons out there, especially senior members of the bar, who have spoken to me personally, is that while this bill is absolutely necessary, and it's not by happenstance that you see members of the police force seated here this evening, it is because they're in a war. They're in a war to protect this country, Mr. Speaker. And we can't send them out with a BB gun when people are prepared to use innovative technology to commit crimes. We must be prepared, Mr. Speaker, to arm the Royal Bahamas Police Force with what is necessary. But to arm them in the context, where those who are responsible for protecting the fundamental rights of every Bahamian or every individual in the Bahamas, that is the court, is properly supervising the execution of this power, because this power allows them to intercept mails, telephones, electric communications, enter private homes, set up listening devices, and as my predecessor in this debate has just indicated, the world has moved far along. It's just striking a balance. I will not, Mr. Speaker, I will not be distracted. And so I second this bill, Mr. Speaker, and our government wholeheartedly supports it. Thank you very much.
As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Mr. Speaker, I will reserve it gives me the opportunity to review the amendments that were just handed to me. So when I come back at 3, I would wish to address this matter of the spy bill.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Bamboo Town. Switch. Oh, okay.
Side opposite, that it is our intent to leave the bill in the committee stage so that we can have so that they would have a more intimate.
So you'll have no argument.
So that there won't be any issues. We're going to leave the bill in committee so that we will have an opportunity with the opposition to be able to discuss the amendments.
Thank you, honourable member.
So, Mr. Speaker, I do move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. today.
Is there a seconder? Second. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend. Honourable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.